Hello guys. So y'all, you know it is soup and stew season, and I have this delicious, easy beef stew for y'all to make. Try out. Girl, you are going to love this beef stew. Now to make this beef stew, you're going to need a beef roast. You need a couple of pounds, 2.5 pound beef roast. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut that roast into 1-inch cubed chunks. We're going to put it in a big bowl. We're going to salt and pepper it and toss it up. Now we're going to brown our beef before we build our stew. Now I'm going to take a couple of tablespoons of olive oil and I'm going to separate it because I'm going to brown my meat in batches. So basically I took 1 tablespoon of olive oil and I'm taking half of my meat and I'm going to go ahead and brown it, and then I'm going to repeat the process until I've browned all my meat. You don't want to put all your meat in at once. If you're using a big enough pot, you can, but if you're not, you want to get that brown crispiness on it. And if you have too much meat in your pot at once, that's not going to happen. So go ahead and do it in batches if you have to. Now once your meat is nice and brown, you want to go ahead and take it out, put it in a bowl and set it aside. So next, if you have to add a little bit more oil, go ahead. Next, we're going to go ahead in that same pot, we're going to add in our onion and we're going to let that get nice and soft and brown. Next, we're going to add in our chunky chopped carrots. And then we're going to let that cook for a couple of minutes, just until your carrots start to get nice and soft. And then we're going to add in some minced garlic. Now you really want to watch this because you don't want your garlic to burn. And after about 30 seconds or so, you want to go ahead and add in some all-purpose flour. This is what's going to make our stew nice and thick. We're just going to let that flour cook for a couple of minutes just to get that raw flour taste out. So next I'm going to add in some tomato paste. And I'm just going to let that tomato paste cook with the flour and the carrots just to kind of get that canned taste out. And now it's time to start adding our liquids. I'm going to go ahead and add in some red wine. I'm using a Pinot Noir. And then I'm going to add in my beef broth. And then I'm going to really whisk this well to make sure all the flour is dissolved. Next, I'm going to add in some chunky cut potatoes. And then I'm going to go ahead and add that meat back in. Next, I'm going to add in some thyme. I'm going to throw in a couple of bay leaves. And then I'm going to add in some black pepper, salt, paprika, and then you guys know I have to add in some onion powder and garlic powder to everything I make. So I added in a little bit of both. And then we're going to go ahead and mix this well. And I almost forgot the Worcestershire sauce. but you want to add in about a tablespoon of that. So next we're going to go ahead and put our lid on, and we're going to let this cook for about an hour and 45 minutes to 2 hours, just until your meat is nice and tender. Now if it gets too thick, you can add a little bit more beef broth just to thin it out to the consistency you like. Now the last 15 minutes of cook time, you want to go ahead and take the lid off, and we're going to add in some corn and peas. I'm not a fan of peas, but this stew was dying for something green, so I went ahead and added in some frozen peas. My corn is canned corn. I went ahead and drained it, and but you can use frozen corn if you have frozen corn. And now we're going to let this cook for about 15 minutes with the lid off. And girl, there is your delicious, delicious beef stew. Y'all, it's so good. Now I came across a recipe that was basically beef stew with puff pastry on the top. So it made it into a beef stew pot pie type of thing. So I wanted to try that out. So I'm going to take my beef stew and pour it into a baking dish. And I'm going to take a couple of sheets of puff pastry, and I'm going to add it to the top. You just want to pinch the pastry alongside of the baking dish to kind of seal it on there. And then go ahead and cut off any extra. And then we're going to take 1 egg yolk and brush the top so it will get nice and brown and shiny. Now if you have extra flour on your puff pastry, go ahead and brush that off first before you add your egg yolk. So next you're going to go ahead and cut a few vent holes. We're going to go ahead and pop this in the oven at 390, and we're going to let it bake for about 30 to 35 minutes. Once it's done, you want to go ahead and let it sit for about 10 minutes. The puff pastry has so many crispy layers. I was a little afraid it was going to be soggy, but you guys, it was so crispy and light and fluffy. This stew is the star of the show. It's so delicious, you guys. It's perfect for this time of year, and I hope you really enjoy it. Yum.